Thank you so much to Jeff, Russ, and Ilya, and Jack for moderating the panel. I think we're just, in the sake of time, we're going to move right into the next one. This one's a lot of fun for me, at least. It's my peers. So these are the early stage investors, and these are the guys that are charged with making the most sort of visionary early stage bets. I heard Adam say yesterday, who's on the panel today, that we're so lucky that we get to have a job where we get to be incredibly supportive of people that are so much smarter than us. And so that's part of what makes this job really fun. And so moderating the panel today, we have David Hamilton from the AP. So he's focused on tech and biomed in terms of the areas. He self-defines as a lapsed engineer, but really he just has a fantastic engineering background. And so I will let you take it away.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Siobhan. We have a great panel for you here, and in lieu of my trying to introduce everybody, I wonder if we could just go down the line quickly, have you guys just give 10, 15 words the most about who you are. This is the From Research Application panel. What we're going to do is have a little bit of general discussion, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to talk about one company they've worked with and sort of how that investment came about, pros and cons, sort of lessons learned and so forth. So, Siobhan?
Go first, okay. Hey, I'm Zafin. I'm an investor at Lux Capital. I teach at Stanford. I have a background in computer science, and I'm a Moneyball advisor to the 76ers. You can make fun of me afterwards for that.
There were a lot of jokes last night at his expense. My name is Adam Doggelli. I work at a firm in San Francisco called True Ventures. We're also an early-stage venture firm. Some relevant investments include Fitbit, Ginger.io, and Deep Genomics, which is at the University of Toronto.
Hi, I'm David Beyer. I'm a former entrepreneur turned investor with a fund called Amplify Partners. We focus on distributed computing, cloud infrastructure, security, and machine intelligence.
My name is James Cham. I'm a seed-stage investor with Bloomberg Beta, where I work with Siobhan, and we focus on the new world of work.
Hi, I'm Nick Adams. I work at Ame Cloud Ventures, which is a fund led by Jerry Yang, who founded Yahoo. We focus on data-driven companies, so companies that are leveraging unique data.
Great, thanks. And before we get started, I just want to let everybody know we actually have already run 10,000 iterations of this panel, so it's been optimized to within an inch of its life. If we run into any hiccups along the way, we're going to blame the algorithm. So, topic of the panel is from research to application. Following the research panel, it seems to be a natural fit. But I wanted to challenge that a little bit and ask you guys, how often are you just running into academic teams who have some brilliant idea that just needs to be turned into a company? And how often is it something different?
I guess I'll start, and I said this to you last night, is that VCs are really bad at funding core research. And when we talk about, at least internally, we talk about taking core research and focusing on kind of teams that have understood what product is and, funding the early engineering challenges to get into market. And so often it is a cross-discipline team who has a unique approach. And so they're part of their solution is the technology that may come out of a university. But a lot of the work they have to do prior to getting funding from us, even at the beginning, is focused on customers and product and what the end solution is.
Yeah, I'd add that one of the interesting developments in the past few years as regards funding core research, especially when it comes to machine intelligence, is there's this now newly expanded acquirer market that didn't really exist, which is to some extent a safety valve for VCs looking to fund those teams. Our firm definitely runs across them quite a lot, and it's difficult because part of you wants to definitely support that. In some cases you can, but it's not immediately commercializable, which from the VC perspective presents difficulties in terms of the horizon of the investment.
I candidly missed the morning, so I'm not sure if this was touched in the morning session with Trey and Blair and others, but I suspect a lot of talk has happened around how fast this is commoditizing. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it's actually really hard to make a bet that this guy's algorithm, this girl's algorithm will work, and let's bet particularly on that. You're always one other grad student coming from University of Toronto away to kind of disrupt that. So mimicking these two guys, and I think hopefully giving some sort of causal explanation as to why it's really hard to make a long-term defensible bet on a particular algorithm or piece of research.
Yeah, let me just sort of a slight. I mean, I think these guys are all right with a little bit of nuance, which is, I think as investors, so much of what we're looking for is the adjacent possible. You know, what is the thing that is possible now that wasn't possible a year ago or 3 years ago? And so often, the folks who know that the best, especially in a fast-changing field like machine intelligence, are at this point the researchers. And so I think that, let's say, compared to 10 years ago or compared to 20 years ago, certainly we are seeing more academics starting interesting companies. And I think if you look at the portfolio of companies that all of us have invested in, it is a higher proportion of people who came from academics than you would have seen, let's say, for your average web startup or your interesting e-commerce company.
Yeah, I would add to that I think a company is a combination of technology and a team. And I think a lot of the time we look at researchers, and when they're married with someone maybe from the business domain or understands the go-to-market, they've known that person for some time, it's often a combination for something very interesting to happen. I'm of the opinion that I prefer to see an application of a technology and the commercialization of a technology. So where technology is used as part of a bigger ingredient to a larger business, I think it makes a lot of sense. But taking something that's already been sort of predetermined and pre-built and the people around that and trying to apply that to a business sometimes doesn't work, and it sometimes does if the team is right to take it to market.
Really quickly before we come back to you, I realized for all the researchers out there, you just heard a bunch of VCs be like, fuck research, we're never going to fund it.
Except for me. Except for
James
Champ. No, I'm just sorry.
Smart move, savvy. Savvy move. I think on a high level, yes. I think that in all of our firms, we will always find a place for smart, ambitious people to come in and learn and iterate. It's probably somewhat dependent on firm and stage and you know what particular appetite we have on what particular day. But all of us have taken those sorts of bets before, and we're not against it. And I think that's actually kind of what gets us up in the morning.
And I think oftentimes our value add is in pushing product and business questions, right? I mean, I just think about some of your best investments. A lot of times they are folks who are either deeply academic or are strongly credentialed, right?
So I'm just curious, David, you mentioned what's basically sort of the acqui-hire scenario. When you see somebody coming along that fits that profile, are you more or less inclined to give them a hearing?
Yeah, definitely. If it's obvious from the start that they're aiming for an acqui-hire, that's not the business that we're in. It's hard to tell. A lot of entrepreneurs, will write off any possibility of ever selling themselves aside from an IPO, and obviously history shows otherwise. You're making a bet on your ability to read this person and the degree of passion they have towards solving a particular problem. And so when it comes to evaluating research teams versus product teams versus a ready-made domain expert plus academic matchup, it really, from my perspective, comes down to evaluating the passion of the team in solving a particular problem rather than necessarily just getting funding for a research lab. And an acqui-hire is, from our perspective, a downside protection rather than a goal.
Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
I guess I want to. I'm reacting to Zavin and James's comments. I would say the biggest shift we've seen in the last decade is just the commoditization of kind of the infrastructure stack, and I'd say we're even seeing that further up, increasingly getting towards the application layer, where it's really hard to sell infrastructure. And so, I think we think about DeepMind as a company that didn't really necessarily have an end application, or Anki, which didn't really necessarily have an end application when they started. And I think those types of companies are going to be increasingly hard, just because Google and Amazon and Microsoft are investing so much money into solutions that solve a lot of these problems that businesses build on top of them. I also say the same thing's happening in the open source world. And so it's increasingly challenging for companies to be built just as a horizontal platform technology and just say, hey, we'll let others build apps on top. I think increasingly, you're going to have to go and build the application layer and the values and the data and the end unique solution versus, hey, we're just a better algorithm than other folks.
Let me give a try at shorter, Adam. Is that the algorithm doesn't matter as much as it used to?
The algorithm matters in context. It's not just a better algorithm by itself. I think it's hard to compete with Google, just given the scale of their resources against that type of thing.
And I think, the additional part of that is, I think we were talking about this last night, that the core insight is interesting. A lot of the hard work is in the fiddling, right? Is in the engineering to actually make something work. And I think that so often as we talk about the commoditization of parts of the stack, the reality is that a lot of the really painful hard work is in just making the product a product. And I think that's so much of what we look for and the sort of talent that we're looking for.
So with all that in mind, when you're evaluating entrepreneurs who come knocking on your door, what is it you would offer as advice? I mean, what should folks be bringing to you? What are the 2 or 3 top things you would like to see from teams?
I would say don't believe anything Zavin has to say, first of all.
Do we all agree on that?
I would agree with that.
Don't wear hats. No, I can answer that first.
Or scarves.
I think the first thing is probably have a problem in mind and try to solve it. Show that there are people who are actively looking for you to solve that problem and willing to take a bet on you from the user or enterprise perspective. The second thing that I look for, and I suspect that these guys look for too, particularly with commoditization in context, is show how you build defensibility over time. If you're maybe like alpha better than the state of the art right now, show that you're alpha plus 1 better than the state of the art tomorrow, alpha plus 4, 5 days from now, whatever. But you want to see that. And that's, I think, what gets all of us excited.
Yeah, I would thread off of that and say at the core of what we think about is kind of the why. Why are you starting this company? And I think when you take one step back, what we really look for is the kind of cross-discipline nature of the team that enables them to kind of see the problem differently. And I think in a little bit you're going to talk about Zymogen as a company, but it's a company that it has, the founders are someone who has a law degree, someone who has robotics experience, and someone who has 2 PhDs in like biochem and computer science. Like collectively, they had known each other for a bunch of years, and so they were able to find a solution for a problem. And if you can find me any more of those teams, I'd love to fund them sight unseen, just because it's rare to find that kind of group together who wants to go and solve a problem. So it's that unfair advantage that I think we think about.
Go ahead. Anybody else who wants to jump in? James?
I think what's interesting about the time that we're in right now is that we're still trying to come up with some sort of good microeconomic framework for understanding the impact of machine intelligence. I think the first good papers on network theory came around in the 70s, and it took basically 30 to 40 to figure out what that actually meant, and you see it in social networks and companies with strong network effects. I think that subscription software, is just now fully kind of understood, and it took, it's been 10 years since Salesforce actually came out. And I think that we are at that point still where people are building intuitions around what does machine intelligence actually mean, and can I think about a company applying machine intelligence to some specific process or some business model, and can I at least have some intuition around whether or not I think it'll work? And I think we're still figuring that out. And to be honest, for the academics out here, and especially the economists, I think that is an area of active interest, I think, for a lot of us, because I think so often machine intelligence gets labeled as either magic, in the case which we all live forever and things are great, or it's terrible because it's somehow labor replacement. And I think there's a more nuanced view, and we're all trying to figure that out right now. And anyone who could help us, I'm James at BloombergBeta.com.
So I just want to ask the original question. So I think the things that I look for in companies and we look for are unique data sets, because I think ultimately a lot of the stuff around machine learning and deep learning is going to start to become commoditized. It's still difficult to take words and vectorize them and create models, but ultimately what data do you have that's unique and differentiated? I think that's quite important. And then as you guys have all said, I think the application, what is and David mentioned solving a problem. I think it has to be more than just solving the problem of making this algorithm or making this research project more interesting. It has to be, what is the business you're disrupting? What is the business model? How is it differentiated? Are you going to try and compete with existing enterprise IT vendors and sell infrastructure and do something better internally? Or are you going to take on a whole new industry like insurance or healthcare or education and really use machine learning as an ingredient to that to then disrupt that? And that's your focus, and that's the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that's the kind of lens that we look through a lot of these things at.
Not to embarrass Dick, because I think he's a good example of one phenomenon. About 10 years ago, if someone showed me an automated scheduler, I would have been really, really impressed. And I would have said, oh my goodness, we've got to go dive in. The other day, Nick showed me a scheduler that he wrote himself, right? And so Nick is very smart, but he is one guy, and he spends most of his time doing venture investing, right? And so we are in a world now where the innovation and the interesting thing is around, like, sort of what is the business model and what are you actually doing? So now everyone should email Nick to try to schedule something and get an automated response.
Yeah, I personally think that this opportunity is maybe not even big enough to create a company around. It's easy, and is it big enough? So what's harder? Where do you have data, and is there a big enough business there? And I think that's where it gets interesting.
I have one more question for you guys before we throw it open to you to talk about some of your investments. As kind of a newcomer to this field, as I haven't spent a lot of time studying it or writing about it up to now, one of the things that strikes me is how many machine intelligence applications to date have so far been sort of incremental. Okay, my email got better at filtering out spam. I can talk to my phone sometimes if it's not too noisy, and sometimes it even understands me. These are all great. None of them have been totally transformative. So I'm curious, particularly as James keeps mentioning, when the business model is an issue, does it matter that a lot of these developments are evolutionary? Is there a point where things actually get revolutionary?
Yeah, I'll go really fast. I think, one, machine learning or a lot of the software tools that we're using right now are tools, right? And it's hard to build particular verticals around them. So in some sense, it will all be incremental. They will always go to places where, we have a structured ontology or a structured way of thinking about things and products and solutions that may or may not exist. But at least those concepts exist already. Two, I think one of the interesting things about machine learning, particularly where it's going now with deep learning, where a lot of the future innovation, or the waiting for smart researchers to come up with aha moments is being pushed more and more to computers, is that it is slightly revolutionary. We're no longer waiting for smart people to kind of see a new way to fold proteins. Rather, we're letting computers do that, and I think that's totally different and frankly, very disruptive.
I would also argue, especially in the case of enterprise applications, that it only appears to be evolutionary, because you had, say, to James's point about software as a service, that represented a milestone, a watermark in how a change in how software was delivered, and it was heralded as a very big deal, which it is in some cases. But the product remained the same, whether it was sales software, HR software, any kind of software application. Machine intelligence as a core component of that kind of application promises to actually rewrite what the application can do. And so if you look at the wide array of existing incumbents when it comes to enterprise applications, they're really under threat. And I think Salesforce paying a premium of hundreds of millions of dollars to buy, for example, Relate IQ, which was just beginning on its journey to do that kind of work, is a testament to the fact that there is a lot of opportunity left to rewrite how a user interacts with the product and what the product can do.
And I think it's a critical question to try to figure out what's the right way to think about machine learning. I think that and so I'm going to say something I think mildly unpopular, but it's possible that once we actually figure out all of the core techniques around machine learning, that in 10 or 15 or 20 years, it'll just be called computational statistics. Right, and it's entirely possible that sort of looking for a revolution in statistics, like the t-test was really important, but what it really enabled was better beer and a bunch of great manufacturing companies. And I think that we've got a similar. It's possible that the right way to think about it is sort of we've come up with a set of tools and a way of thinking about the world that will result in a whole new set of interesting industries, and so it's not really. I mean, no one really made that much money off of the t-test, right? But there were, except for every person in the world who benefited from it in all the industries that were created.
I think what's happening, I'm particularly interested in a particular aspect of machine intelligence, and it's the way that it's going to change interfaces in our lifetimes. And sort of what's happening now is the foundations have been laid for almost everything anyone says in English and other languages is now very accurately transcribable into actual text. Now, interpreting the text is a whole different story. But if you think about it, imagine wearing an earpiece or something, having everything you've said, everyone has said an entire day recorded. Now, we may not be able to interpret everything that person said, but over time we will be able to. So the other thing I'm interested in is if anyone has an Amazon Alexa or an Echo, you'll know that anywhere in the large room that it's in, you'll be able to say something to it. It'll pretty accurately understand what you're saying. Siri is now listening all the time for the keywords, "Hey Siri." And I think that changes the way we interact with technology in a very positive way, and will sort of open the floodgates for a lot of data to be generated, which over time will be very valuable.
How many folks have used Alexa in the room? So it is, and I don't want to be an Amazon ad. I don't own any stock in Amazon, but it is a remarkable experience. And so you should either check one out at the local mall or try it, because it does feel like it changes the way that you think about your relationship with the computer and with your systems.
If you add James as a referral, he gets 5 cents for every entry. So make sure to do that.
Again, James at BloombergBeta.com.
All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and move to some discussions of your guys' experience. Really kind of out here on the fringe of investing and venture investing, it strikes me, because this field was stagnant for so long and then sort of burst to life. And there's a lot of wild and crazy stuff out there. So I'll tell you what, why don't we start from the far end? Nick, why don't you start and tell us an interesting story about a company.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think we're overinvested in this space. We're in Atomwise, Osaro, Vectra, which was mentioned by Eric earlier. We're in Zymogen, which is going to be mentioned by Zavin later. We're also in Nirvana Systems, Vicarious, Kindred, Rigetti Quantum Computing. So, in fact, there was 1 week where we invested in Vicarious and Rigetti. It was the same week that Transcendence came out, this terrible movie with Johnny Depp where this quantum computer is loaded with a AI algorithm and becomes cleverer than everyone in the world. And I kind of thought that we're investing in the future in a very scary way. But I'm going to talk about a company that is not an enterprise company and not actually publicly launched. But an interesting, again, taking on a huge vertical industry and taking it on with a unique data set. This company is taking on Adt Security company. They are using sensor fusion to develop a very, very accurate algorithm for figuring out people who are entering a building that shouldn't be there. And it's people, so curtains will not set it off, dogs will not set it off. Even a dog dragging a large stuffed toy that looks like a human will not set it off. And it's using deep learning. And I think this is exciting because they'll have a unique data set over time. They may need human trainers to help assist the algorithm occasionally. But over time, they build up a very defensible data set, and they're taking on a huge industry where they're going to own the relationship with the customer, and I really like that too, because I think you ultimately, very early in your business, going to have to figure out, are you going to try and sell to another business, or are you going to try and own the relationship with an end consumer? And I kind of big bets where companies are trying to revolutionize an industry and own that relationship, and this is what this company is doing as well. So that's my example.
Thanks. James?
That's a great company. Let me talk a little bit about Orbital Insight, which Andy talked about earlier today, just to highlight a couple of interesting points, because I think all of us at this table are, for the most part, seed stage or early Series A investors, meaning that we're investing, sort of maybe when the product is barely working and where most of the team is put together. And just to highlight a couple of questions that I think I ask myself now around trying to guess whether this will be an interesting application of machine intelligence. If you'll recall, Orbital Insight is a company that takes satellite imagery. You'll remember Andy gave a very good description of it. But if you would imagine a company that could take satellite imagery and then understand things like how much oil is there in the entire world, or understand questions like, if we look at every single cornfield, can we actually understand what the given crop yield will be like next year? Or if we look at every single parking lot in the entire country, can we guess whether or not Sears is a U.S. retailer that used to exist. But, Sears, or how Sears is doing versus Kmart versus Macy's. And I think the interesting thing there is we did see analogies. We did see companies that did this already in manual ways, right? So there were competitors, but the difference, there are two key differences. One is there is obviously labor savings in being able to use computers in order to automatically look through these images and start making guesses. But the other key part of it is that the team that he was clearly going to be able to recruit meant that we had a great deal of confidence in their engineering ability, right? Because in some ways, if you look at the core algorithms or core insights, they all come out of existing research for the last 20 years. but the actual application and actually fiddling with the data in order to figure out how to deal with satellite imagery, to deal with large quantities of satellite imagery, that's something that he and his team, the people he was able to recruit, were uniquely able to address. And so I think the interesting thing there is, at the stage that we're at, we're partially looking for proof points. We're partially looking for, whatever research has been done out there. But a lot of what we're looking for is, can we piece together a couple of points of data to come up with some sort of trajectory so that later on, this could be a dominant or interesting company.
Great, thanks. David?
The company I'd highlight is a company called Analytic, which was founded by Jeremy Howard, who was previously the president of another data company called Kaggle. And its focus ultimately is to build the next generation medical diagnostics company. And it's starting by applying deep learning to radiology, where it's particularly effective. And they've shown pretty incredible results so far in beating panels of radiologists and, for example, accurately detecting cancer nodules in chest CT scans or small minor fractures of the extremities. And I think what I would take away from this company, or what I want you to take away is it speaks to what we were talking about earlier with regards to finding passionate teams who want to solve something in a singular way, and the difficulty frequently of finding strong academic or technical chops in marrying that up with domain expertise. And so this team has managed to assemble a really great combination of skills, from radiology to experience with working with large hospital systems, and have managed to do quite well. And in terms of industries, I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of room to challenge the enterprise status quo when it comes to applications. One of the things that we're always eager to find are people tackling complicated, slow, but very, very large industries. For example, energy, transportation, and healthcare is one of the largest cost drivers for humanity. And I think that was what got us excited there.
I'll tell you one thing that interests me about analytics that you described there. It wasn't that long ago that companies like Nighthawk were spending a lot to outsource the reading of radiology scans. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, this would sort of outsource the outsourcing to the machines.
Yeah, I mean, say that they're not looking to replace radiologists, but they fundamentally give them a greater than one order of magnitude leverage to prioritize scans, to annotate things automatically. They basically mean that you can take the time from a patient being admitted to a patient receiving their results by a life-saving amount. And it's going to depend on the modality and on the disease, but their goal is not to be the ultimate arbiter of what the scan says, but rather to give the existing radiologists 10x, 100x more leverage than they have.
Very cool. Adam?
I'll briefly talk about a company called Ginger.io, which we funded probably 3 years ago now. They use mobile smartphone data to help patients with anxiety and depression better manage their condition. Again, this was a combination team, PhD in Sandy Pentland's lab, expert in how the mobile phone interacts with data, combined with an MD who also had an MBA. And so kind of had this dual domain expertise. Early on in the company's life cycle, they understood, they could understand from changes in behavior from this phone data when they were having issues potentially around anxiety or depression, and then interventions. And so the company's long-term value is this vertical data set they're building around behavior and how it maps to different disease states. But the technology was just one piece of the broader clinical protocol, where they hire nurses, they have nurses and coaches who help patients and psychologists and psychiatrists as well. And so effectively building the next generation hospital. And so it's built on core technology, but it is all things about the patient at the end. It's kind of the core service. So.
Great.
Cool. I will quickly say, like Nick and others, we've spent really the last few years investing heavily in machine learning, machine intelligence companies. I think, Matt from Clarify spoke earlier. We're in Orbital Insight. We're in a bunch of these guys. The one I'm going to talk about today is actually one I wrote a small personal check-in. It's called Zymogen. A few of the guys mentioned it. And what they do is microbe and genetic optimization for chemical conglomerates. What does that mean? They've created an automated lab and really made what has been a traditional handheld pipetting analytic process for chemists into a computer science that's driven by data and automation. There's not much sexy deep learning or machine learning yet. It's still a very kind of basic gradient descent, I think Bayes nets and stuff like that. But you can see where the future is going, and I think it's going there. I think the problem, and I think more and more industries will become like this, is if you go into a traditional wet lab today, there are scientists who have the magic hand, and they're the guys and girls who can pipette, exactly, a particular amount. And it's like going to Ilya from the last session and saying, Ilya, I don't know about his computer science, but that guy can fucking type fast, and he can code faster than anyone else. And because of that, we think he's a good computer scientist, and then that's a crazy state of the world. So Zymogen has essentially created the infrastructure to make this problem a computer science problem. And with that, they kind of correlate genotype to phenotype for genomic data sets. Two interesting things, and why I think it's particularly for us to talk about it, is one, over time, they start to build a proprietary data set, something that all of us have harped on. And I think, hopefully sometime next year, they might have the largest genomic to phenotypic data set in existence. Which is exciting for any of us here, particularly, I think, the biologists. And two is that, they're actually solving a real problem, capturing revenue, going to some unsexy, bespoke industry, but hopefully building a business there as well. So,
Can I just ask a quick question? What's the ultimate point of this microbial engineering? Is this about production of biologic drugs or a variety of things?
It changes over time. Right now, they're going to guys like Cargill or Ajinomoto, Dow, or DuPont and saying, hey, look at lysine. What if we optimized yields for $1 billion product line? 20%. That's $200 million to your P&L, and let's take 10% of that. Middle term, maybe they start building their own materials. Long term, I think it's going to take time there, particularly with things in both synthetic biology and machine learning, two of the scarier sciences out there, for those kind of sciences to enter therapeutics. But long term, I would love to see it go there.
Excellent. Do any of you guys have anything you want to say about the others companies? I guess there's so much cross-investment going on here, there might not be.
They are all great.
All right. We have 1 minute and 45 seconds. We have a question from the audience. Any questions for the panel?
You mean the exhausted audience that's dying to go for a break?
It is starting to look like that. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. I will say it's been a pleasure being here. I hope my panelists feel likewise. And at the rate this field is moving, next year we'll just all be replaced by conference bots, perfectly optimized conference bots. So we won't see you next year.